Welcome to the channel. My name is Matthias. Today, I came across a second Wolverine character sheet. So instead of diving into the sheet itself, because it repeats a lot of the previous one, we are going to go through a list of every single Wolverine costume. I might be missing a few, but we're going to rate them. And I'm going to give you guys personally which one is my favorite. So without further ado, let's get into it. So we're going to go like in a chronological order. And the first one is the Weapon X costume. It's not a costume, it's the gear that Weapon X used to experiment on Wolverine, and he escapes wearing all this stuff. It's part of a very emblematic story arc, and it looks like a bitch to draw in every single panel. So that's why it's pretty much relegated to that first story Marvel Comic Presents and in flashbacks. I'm going to give it 2 snicks out of 3. The second costume that we get is the Whisker costume. That's the one where he first went up against the Hulk. Personally, I never really liked this costume, so I'm going to give it 0 snicks. I'm having a hard time pronouncing snicked. Now, the third one is the classic Tiger Stripe costume. It's a evolution of the Whisker costume, and it's a classic. I feel like it's the most emblematic for Wolverine, so I'm going to give it 3 snicks. Then we get the briefly used Fang costume that used to belong to a member of the Imperial Guard, and Wolverine stole it during the Brood story arc. He used it very briefly during that Brood story arc, and then he fought Iron Fist using that costume. So I'll give it 1 snicked. And Marvel really wanted to use this costume because later down the line, X-23 uses it, and then Daken too. Then we have the Patch era Wolverine, where when he's operating as a superhero, that costume gets 1 snicked. That instead of using a mask, he would use like a stocking over his eyes. That looked terrible. Also, during that time, Wolverine was like the protector of this brothel. Well, it was a bar, but it was implied it was a brothel. And he was like the bodyguard to the crime lord of Madripoor, Tiger, during that time. So he would always rock these white suits that looked really cool. So that one would get 3 snicks. I found it hilarious to hide his identity as Wolverine. He would use a eye patch. That's where the patch name came from. Then we have the classic X-Men uniforms, the training uniforms, which I've always loved how they look. So Wolverine using that particular training uniform that took part of the Muir Island saga, I'm going to give it 2 snicks. Then we can jump to Caveman Wolverine, that time where he de-evolved and for some reason he lost his nose. And he was rocking the bone claws. And for some reason, he started to look more and more like Beast. Like, I know he was de-evolving, but there was a moment that it looked like the X-Men had 2 Beasts in the lineup. This costume and this era is going to get 0 snicks. Then Wolverine is captured by Apocalypse and converted into the Horseman Death. And within the context of the 12 crossover, which I didn't like, that subplot with Wolverine was freaking awesome. And we get a super cool showdown between Wolverine Death and the Hulk. Also, during this time, Apocalypse had given Wolverine back his adamantium skeleton and his claws. So this is going to get 3 snicks. And I have to say, it's so weird because Marvel never revisited this version of Wolverine. That would have been super cool to see him get back into this death persona. Like it happens with Warren Worthington III and his Archangel persona. Or even Gambit, like when he stopped being Death, he felt like the repercussions for a while. Then we get the new X-Men era Wolverine with leather pants and the leather jackets. And even though that era of X-Men was like critically acclaimed, it wasn't my cup of tea, so I'm going to give it 0 snicks. Then we get the Ultimate Wolverine uniform, which I'm pretty indifferent to. Like, I checked out with the Ultimate Universe halfway through the X-Men run. And that costume felt a little bit generic, so I'm going to give it 1 snicked. Then we get the Astonishing X-Men Tiger Stripe costume, which is a modification to the classic costume, but it looks so freaking awesome. It's also the costume Wolverine uses during the Enemy of State story arc, which is one of my favorite. So I'll give that one 3 snicks. Then you have X-Force Wolverine, which is the black and gray costume with the red eyes. That one was super cool within the context of that series. when Wolverine's running around with his Black Ops team, which I always call Team Claws. The thing is, I'll give it 3 Snicks. Then you get that weird battle armor costume that Wolverine had when he lost his powers and he sort of became like a bad guy. I really remember not liking that era of Wolverine, so I'm going to give it 0 Snicks. And last but not least, because we're in a sandwich together, this costume and my favorite one is the Krakoan era Wolverine costume, which is a modification to the orange and brown costume, which is my favorite. It's the costume that Wolverine rocked when I got into comics. When I got my first Wolverine comic book, he was wearing that orange and brown costume. I just really love how it looks, and how they change it and modify it for the Krakoan era made it look even better. So I'm going to give it 15 Snicks, and we're going to leave this video here. I hope you guys liked it. See you guys next time. Bye.